Hey everyone, thank you so much for returning to the Sussy Soul podcast. Before I released the recording of this particular episode, I just wanted to preface a couple of things that I discussed because I felt like as I was talking very freely, and I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. So first, what I want to briefly discuss is that I will be coming out with the second season of Sussy Soul, which is something I'm very, very excited about. I cannot wait to release all the episodes. I will be having conversations with a lot of people and individuals and entrepreneurs in this space who have been doing such great work, and I'm really, really excited about that. So please stay tuned, and obviously, thank you guys so much for your support. Anyone who has been supporting me so far and listening, thank you so much. So just for reference, I just discussed my particular concerns about the airline industry and greed as it relates to sustainability. Another thing that I discuss is towards the end of the episode, I talk about when in terms of sustainability, in terms like the term itself, I actually really don't like because it is a buzzword. It's kind of annoying to me at this point, and I feel like many people may or may not agree with that. I particularly discuss being led by being led by divine power, being led by your inner self, and really harnessing your particular purpose as an individual to solve problems. So what I want to make clear is that unfortunately there are a lot of groups and things like that who are out there who do believe in violence, and that they are led by some sort of divine power, or God told them to do something, or some sort of divine something somewhere in the divine told them to do things that are incredibly violent. So when I'm talking about that, I am not in no way endorsing or supporting violence when it comes to that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of groups out here, violent groups, that do feel like God told them to do things, or the universe told them to do things. I'm not talking about those people. I'm not talking about that, and I'm not talking from that perspective. I am coming from a place of love, and not any of that. So I just wanted to make that clear. And I do talk about that a little bit in the actual recording, but I just wanted to make that very clear. I am not talking about violence. And in addition to that, I also reference Tabitha Brown, someone who I really love watching, especially during the pandemic. I talk about, she was on a podcast, and the podcast that I referenced that she was on when I talk about why she has inspired me, the podcast is called The Love Hour by Mrs. Kev on Stage. Her name is Kev on Stage. Mrs. Kev on Stage. Her name is Melissa, and she is the wife of Kev on Stage, who is a very popular comedian, and I in no way know them. I do not know them, and they don't know me, so this is not sponsored at all, but they just put out a lot of really good content, and that is the particular podcast and episode that I was discussing in this show. But outside of that, thank you guys so much for listening. I really, really hope you enjoy this particular episode. I do go in depth about a few things, and I really, really hope it provides value to you. And I hope you really gain something from it. And thank you so much for taking your precious time to listen to this episode. And again, to another episode of Sussy Soul. We have a lot of exciting things coming up, and I cannot wait to share those with all of you. Thank you so much, and please enjoy. Bye. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to voice what's currently going on in the world and my opinion, my personal opinion on it. And in addition to that, I also want to celebrate everything that is going on as well. So, for celebration, the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests, this is good, right? It's all good in a way, but it's disheartening because it's like we've been talking about this for centuries. So it's kind of like what you know, I am done. I'm tired. I am over the watering down. I am over the code switching. I'm over the code switching. I'm over all the things that Black people have to endure in everyday life, and in professional life. I'm done. I love being Black. I always have. And personally, I grew up in a family that taught me the beauty of Black beauty, and they taught me and my younger brother Joshua our history. We know who we are. And obviously there's a lot more education, there's a lot of education, in relation to that subsequently. But everything that's happening feels good in a way. It feels like there is a slither or a glimmer of light of hope in terms of true change. But history has shown that even with the civil rights movement and all the movements and all the things that Black people have done, and all the strides and all the depths and all of the things. And we're still here in 2020 fighting like this. So it just goes to show you everything that this country, America, is built on. So you have that. So that's where my anxiety is in terms of like what will happen after this. I'm still very cautious in terms of what this will look like, say in the fall. This is in June 2020 when things are starting to open up. I'm also, this is also in New York City where, we were, the epicenter a couple of months ago, and now things are starting to open up and blah, blah, blah. But what's going to happen after this? I don't know. But I am slightly hopeful. And I'm only slightly hopeful because of the origins of our country. So I'm still on edge about those things. I'm happy to see that Black-owned businesses are being uplifted and put out there. That's a whole other conversation to have because there's a lot more there's so much more that still has to be done. But I do like seeing that a lot of Black businesses are being shared on social media. More and more people are learning about Black-owned businesses. So that's a good thing. And that's what I like to see. So that's been great, right? Now, in terms of the current situation, Trump is one thing, which is often like a joke. So I'm not even going to entertain all of that. So the reason why I decided to record this today is because I was looking at the news and they were talking about how, everything's starting to open up, and then unfortunately, there's another surge on the West Coast and the South, in certain states with with COVID-19. But at the same time, airlines are crowding people on airlines again. And while I understand that businesses have to make sure they fill seats to make the money to pay their employees, which is in my mind, I am hoping that is the main goal, which is oftentimes the goal. But when you think of huge corporations and huge businesses on that scale, it's hard for me to believe that the reason why they're continuing to risk lives for the sake of making money has nothing to do with their team, with their human capital. Human capital. Which was which didn't surprise me, because when you think of all the businesses throughout the US that are struggling because of the pandemic, the only reason they're struggling is because they don't have the money. It all comes down to money, which is reasonable, which is valid. And that's where our country sort of like dropped the ball, as it often does, especially, at least from my perspective as an African American, especially when it comes to people of color and communities of color and entrepreneurs of color. That's a whole separate conversation. And then you have these, in terms of the airline industry, you had a lot of talks about the bailouts and stuff like that, blah, 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 right? So looking at the news now, it's just kind of like, oh, people are like flying, and it's just like, there's no pandemic, basically, in terms of social distancing. And it's just like, for people who travel a lot, at least for myself, I can definitely speak for myself. Like, I always make sure I carry like oregano oil and all this, at least, in terms of a natural sort of like, in terms of addressing like, viruses and things like that. Oregano oil, by the way, is a really good antiviral herb that you can take. But I definitely also bring everything else. But yeah, they're crowding people on planes again. Like, there's like, the virus is gone. And it's just kind of like, why? There's enough planes, one, and there's enough people to provide valid reasoning to travel, where we don't have to crowd people on planes. So that, for me personally at least, it's just kind of like, gosh, wow, it's all about the money again. But even so, had the government supplied, and this is not only for the airline industry, but just most businesses and people who, all when you think of all the businesses, there's you have a lot of businesses that have like closed temporarily, but you have a lot of businesses that have gone bankrupt and just like they're done, right? Which is awful. And it's just like, when you think of America, it's like the American dream, right? We're built on that, right? So it's just kind of like, why hasn't the government, caught everyone, right? Why hasn't the government really created that safety net for businesses to say, okay, look, we got you until this point, right? Because this is uncontrollable and blah, blah, blah. So have the government just like taken care of the sort of, or at least forgiven, and I'm not saying just the airline industry. I'm talking about all businesses, especially small businesses who do not have the flexibility, the financial flexibility to survive things like this. It's, for me, obviously all the things. But then when you get back to like the sort of like general things like flying, because a lot of us want to know when we can travel again and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, for people like myself who do travel a lot, I would prefer to be 6 feet apart from everyone else. Like, traveling and being on a plane is very disgusting. Like, and most people know that. Like, airlines they're like one of the most, you can like catch viruses and germs. Like, it's ridiculous. So obviously that's definitely a thing to discuss in terms of like, sanitation on airlines and airports and things like that. But yeah, it's just really, really disheartening. I'm not surprised because of this country, because of the understanding that I have of what it's built on and its origins. So it's not a surprise. But after everything, it's still based on greed. So personally, and I don't speak for everyone, obviously, and I don't speak for everyone in the sustainability space, but when you think about consumption, this is something to really, really think about when we think about business and businesses when you try to scale a business, and becoming so big to the point where you have to make where you have to risk lives in order to make money. And that's what brings me back to the fact that I'm like, I hope that the fact that they're doing this is to keep their people employed. I'm hoping that the origin of these decisions turns back to people. We need to keep our people employed, which is valid. And I mean, from a small business, a tiny business to a big business, right? But the disheartening part relates to larger businesses, and the fact that it doesn't shock me, but it just definitely raises the question. I mean, again, this is not my first time raising this question. I feel like for a lot of people, it's not surprising, right? They're huge, they're corporations, blah blah blah, right? But as I discussed in the last episode that I did, I talked about consumption and the way we consume. But greed is truly a problem, and shocker, right? Like, obviously you guys know that it's not a shocker. Like, we've been talking about it's ancient, right? Greed is, it's one of the, 7 sins, I believe, or whatever. So thinking of thinking of greed, and then when we also think about sustainability, they can't coexist, because you have a lot of airlines, especially professionals within the sustainability space, that are working in carbon and all that stuff and offsets and things like this. It's just, how do we address these problems, right? Because as we've seen, especially like in India, and also Venice specifically, the fish came back to Venice. I remember I was in Venice a few years ago, and it was just it was like a turquoise-ish-esque blue, but there were definitely no fish. And it's just like within I think a month or so, the fish came back. It just goes to show you how impactful tourism and greed and commerce on that scale impacts the environment. So people who are working in sustainability in all these different industries, how do we really address this problem, right? How do we intersect and address business? How do we really truly grow a sustainable business? Personally, I do not believe that scaling a sustainable business to be super. That's why I don't believe in corporations, only because so many people and communities and natural resources are sacrificed because of its support. There's so many stakeholders and unheard voices under these huge corporations, which is one thing. But in addition to that, you also have the fact that a lot of these things it's just not sustainable. The world has existed for thousands and thousands of years, and it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that, things started to hit the fan with the environment and people. Not people, because social issues have existed for centuries. But in terms of the environment and really, really violating our natural resources, that wasn't until, fairly recently in retrospect. So how do we address greed and building business and commerce and scaling as a business? But how do we do that in a sustainable way that does not exploit communities and people and natural resources? As an African American woman, And by the way, I love being Black. I love my Blackness. I adore it. That's one thing in terms of the conversation. And then in addition to that, when you think of the environment and our relationship to the environment, what are we going to do about all this? There's a lot of problems that are not discussed. And this is coming from someone who, has an advanced degree in this whole sustainability space. And none of this was discussed in, while I was a student. Even at an Ivy League university, none of these things were discussed. So there's a huge disconnect in terms of really addressing these problems. Even in a program that intends to address these problems, a lot is not being discussed. So much is not being discussed, which encourages that disconnect, And that is what is disheartening, because so many things are not being discussed and a lot is not being done by all of us as individuals, because I don't believe in one person or one company being able to do it all. We all need to have these uncomfortable conversations, identify our individual strengths, weaknesses, and gifts, but more importantly, identifying our gifts and our strengths and applying those things to solving and eradicating problems and issues. And a lot of those things, unfortunately, I believe cannot be solved through corporations or a job, because there's so much other things involved in terms of your individual impact when you do it with a corporation, a large organization. There's so many other things that they have to deal with, to the point where they can't even really make the impact that they want to, because that's how big they are at this point. So it's just another level of solving problems. But for anyone out there who is listening, and thank you, by the way, again, thank you so much. How do you identify your purpose? And that's another buzzword, just like sustainability, which I am annoyed by. I do not like the term sustainability, also because it is a buzzword. It's a trend, and it should not be. So for individuals out there, how do you identify, your individual strengths? Especially for people who are within the sustainability community, who believe in it, who believe in climate change. All the tree huggers out there, all the environmentalists out there, how do we harness our individual gifts, our divine gifts and talents and skill sets to eradicate problems and to solve problems and to enrich society? And I know a lot of that sounds a little bit frou-frou, but when you think of the environment, which is so majestically natural, how do we harness our natural gifts, things that come naturally to us? And that's why I brought up the divine. That's why I brought up the spiritual thing. Because it is spiritual. It's spiritual. Our connection to the land is spiritual. So how do we harness that? And this is within any industry. How do we harness our skills and our purpose and our individual gifts and passions and apply that to solve problems? We all need each other. No one person can do it alone, because it's stressful. It's stressful, and it will kill someone, because it's just too much. It's too much. Even as an African American woman, it's all just too much. I will no longer filter myself to make people comfortable. So that is my question to anyone who is listening. How do you harness your gifts, your divine gifts, to solve and eradicate problems. And how do we do that? And that is a question. So for me personally, I know that through this podcast, one way I'll be doing that is to amplify entrepreneurs of color who work in the space and who are solving problems directly. That's one way. And I have a few things of my own, but stay tuned for that. But it's all exciting, but that's how you should feel, right? Because that's also one of the blessings of life. You should feel anything that you do should feel, it should empower you. It should feed you. And a lot of times it's like either working or serving, whatever, you are harnessing your purpose and your individual gift. And whatever skill set that you've adopted, that you've become really good at, it's another thing you can harness to solve problems. So so I'll stop now. Let's solve problems. Let's harness all of our strengths and our gifts and the things that make us happy and the things that bring us joy to address problems and to eradicate problems and issues and injustices and racism and environmental problems, like all the things. And how do we address like access to education? How do we all the things, y'all. Let's do it. Because also, one more thing, sorry. I'm tired of going to all the panels. I'm tired of watching all the webinars. I'm tired of it's just like I've learned, technically I've learned enough. I'm ready to do. So how do we do? And when I say that, at least personally, I speak for myself, Latoya Ramos. How do we harness and empower and feed ourselves in a way that we are positioned, divinely positioned to do these things? So I don't know if anyone is a fan of Tabitha Brown. She's like super sweet. I just love her. She's just such a joy, especially during this pandemic. I have just enjoyed watching her. But she was on a podcast, and she was just talking about her journey and all this stuff and the spiritual stuff. And she was just saying how when you're positioned to do something, there's no stress. And that was so powerful to me, because for all of the activists out there, for all the people who are on the ground, for all the people who are out there doing the groundwork, for all the people who are losing sleep. I mean, I've definitely been losing sleep, but like all the real activists on the ground, for all the activists who are not on social media, who are not, for all the real ones, right? Because there's a lot of real ones on social media, but there's a lot that are not. And they're out here. And I just wanted to amplify, because when you're positioned to do something, there's no stress. And I am not about stressing yourself out. I'm all about self-care and finding a balance with these things. So yeah, how do we find that balance? And how do we identify where we're divinely positioned to do whatever work that it is that we are positioned and called to do within all these things? And as a collective, we can definitely make change. So it's identifying, obviously this is definitely like a mental health thing, and you have to do a lot of personal work to figure this out. And that's a process too. But let's do it, right? And let's do it in a way that is sustainable for ourselves as human beings, in a way that builds us up, in a way that feeds us, in a way that provides nutrients to our soul and to others and to causes and to movements and to all the things. Let's harness our power to do the thing. Harness your power to do the thing. Harness your divine power. Harness your God-given, and for some people, God-given universal power that you're called to do the thing. Because there's a lot of problems that need to be addressed, and yeah, that's it. It's a lot, it's heavy, but I want to also make sure that people, we're all healthy doing these things because it's all so much, it's all so heavy. But let's find that balance. But let's listen to the higher power. Let's listen to God. Let's listen to Jesus, the universe, Buddha, whatever God or deity you worship. I believe in God, personally. But let's hear that, and let's walk in that, and let's thrive in that way, and walk in that truth, our divine truth. So, yes, I promise. So I'll stop now. I know I said I'll stop, but this was just on my heart. I wanted to put it out there, but I hope that this just encouraged people, individuals, to understand what's happening right now. And when I say this, I'm acknowledging what's happening right now, the heaviness of what's happening right now, the hope that is like very blurry in many different ways for different people. I also want to just encourage everyone to do their work. Do your work, your divine work. And when I say and I know that, and this is not because unfortunately a lot of hateful people out there who feel that there's a lot of hateful people who feel like their work or things they do is divine, that comes from God. I ain't talking about y'all. I'm coming from a place of love and equality and equity, and not hatred or discrimination. And I want to make sure I'm clear on that, because unfortunately a lot of the hate crimes that you see, when you look at the reports and stuff, the individuals, they believe that, they were called to do that, or they were, God told them to do that. I'm so sorry. That is not what I'm talking about. I am coming from a place of love and equality and life. Okay. I'm sorry. It's just so I just had to say that because it's just so twisted and demented, and it's just, oh my gosh. So yes, please be led by your inner spirit and your divine calling, whatever that is for you, whatever that means for you, and please walk in that. And you never know what doors will open for you, and that's something that I'm also telling myself. And I really, I've really been getting in tune with that, and really paying attention to that personally. And I hope you all are doing that as well. Please stay tuned. I will be, I have a lot of exciting things coming up. And I hope that I, at least through this podcast, can continue to empower and inspire all the listeners to this podcast. And yeah, peace and love and light. And I will see you next time until we chat. If you are on Instagram, I am at SeenGreenNYC and Susty Soul on Instagram. So reach out. Let me know what you think. I would love to, if you can, subscribe to the podcast and all that stuff. I definitely appreciate it. But yes, love and light to everyone, and please, harness your higher power. Harness all of your higher power, your divine God-given power. So peace and love. Mwah. Bye, everyone.